Hey there, this is Pete Townsend, and this is episode 36 of Money Never Sleeps, a podcast that looks inside the head of entrepreneurs and at what makes them do what they do. This episode is kindly sponsored by Ireland's fintech and financial services recruitment specialist, Top Tier Recruitment. If you or a colleague need help attracting and retaining great talent for your fintech or financial services company, I highly recommend you have a chat with the team at Top Tier Recruitment, as they really know their stuff. You can find them at toptierrecruitment.com and tell them we sent you. This week, Owen and I had a chat with Jennifer Hourihane of the West Cork Hourihanes. Jennifer is the founder and CEO of Oathello, a Dublin and London-based tech firm accelerating the signing, execution, and completion of documents online for the financial system. Owen and I were both familiar with Jennifer and Oathello before recording this interview, but this was the first time either of us had had a chat with her. This was our third remote recording using the Zencastr app, so just a heads up that sound quality is a bit different than having our guest here in the room with us. But enough with the small talk, and on with the show.
Money never sleeps, pal.
Here we go again. Welcome to Money Never Sleeps. We're here in WeWork, Dublin Landings, in the offices of our sponsor, Top Tier Recruitment. I'm Pete Townsend.
And I'm Owen Fitzgerald.
And we're on with Jennifer Hourihane, CEO of Oathello. Welcome to the show, Jennifer.
Hi, Pete. Thank you.
Awesome. So I'm familiar with Oathello, but we only recently connected on LinkedIn after Owen set this up. But we've had Chris Adelsback on from Techstars, who I think you know, Martin Cass, who we know you know.
Enda from Court's Desk.
And Enda from Court's Desk, yes, absolutely. So for both me and for our listeners, and for Owen as well, maybe just give us a bit of history on what you're up to and how you got to this point.
Sure. So I'm a qualified lawyer and I was practicing law in a commercial firm in Dublin for a number of years. Went through, I guess I watched too much Ally McBeal and figured that law was the best route for me. And I really enjoyed and learned a lot about, business and finance generally during the course of practicing law, but always had, I guess, ambitions to do something, in the tech space and something entrepreneurial. And I suppose had been looking at some of the issues that were existing in the management of documents and paperwork, and stumbled across the Oathello opportunity from first-hand experience, I guess. And we're all aware, I guess, lawyers get a bit of a bad rap when it comes to the speed at which transactions and paperwork can complete. But I guess what I learned in practicing law is it's not really the lawyer's fault. It's the fault of, a system that doesn't have the right tools to hand. So I founded Oathello in 2016 with a goal to accelerate the speed at which some of the most important transactions in the lifetime of an individual or company can be completed. And we do that by focusing on high ticket value documents in the legal and financial system and providing the tools that enable paperwork in that space to be completed legally online a lot easier and quicker than the current system permits.
It's fascinating because when I heard about Oathello first, which is some point last year, I found it really interesting because I'm ex-Barclays and I used to work on the corporate side. So I worked on a lot of corporate transactions. And I actually took a career break from Barclays in 2013. And when I was leaving, I had lunch with one of the guys in legal. And they said, if you're looking to do something, to earn some cash, you should go off and become a commissioner of oath and just go around and notarize stuff. And you could do well for yourself. I was like, oh, that sounds like hassle. I have no interest in doing that sort of thing. But that was 2013. So it's I know the pain in detail of the documentation and the hassle and the time that's taken. So I was fascinated when I heard then about what you were doing. And I knew firsthand the problems.
That's, I guess, where the name comes from. And so historically, very important documents in the payments and finance space, or even in general life, would always have been dealt with by notaries or a commissioner for oaths that needed to witness or attest to the contents of the documents and the people that were completing them. And in the old days, that would have been verifying the truth of a matter would have been done by trial by combat or swearing on your mother's life. We're all familiar with Game of Thrones. But those very important events or statements in writing are now verified by officers of the court, notaries, or commissioner for oaths, and it made its way into the legal system and the statute books by that requirement. But, in-person authentication can have a pretty chilling effect on the speed at which these documents can be completed legally. And so, there are thousands of reasons why you need a notary or commissioner for oaths, but we focused on one or two use cases that are most relevant for payments and finance, because that's what we're particularly passionate about. We're passionate about ensuring that paperwork moves as fast as money does. And there's patience required in all of these things, because there are very valid reasons for the existence of a lot of these rules, and it's about figuring out really clever ways to bridge the gap between what's permissible by law and desirable by the business.
I suppose financial services and focusing on that side of it is a high volume business, even though it's you're narrowing it down a bit. I mean, I know there was article came out last year where JP Morgan had gotten some tech in that replaced something like 360,000 law or lawyer hours that they booked in that particular year, because it was just stuff that they could automate. So I suppose it's a high volume business, I suppose, even though it's you're focused mainly on one sort of sector.
Yeah, I mean, I think time as a currency is a very difficult one for any vertical to argue, whether you're a lawyer or you're in any other business. We're very much living in an on-demand society. I guess when it comes to legal services generally and their business model and the application of legal services, I guess we're more API driven and more about providing banks and lawyers or the stakeholders within the value chain of paperwork the right tools to complete documents. So I suppose we're not particularly embedded in the provision of legal advice generally, but it's definitely indicative of, banks and merchant services and any of the stakeholders in the payments and finance space are becoming more attuned to the need to speed these transactions and the provision of legal services up generally. I guess it's like that race that's on for merchants and customers, and paperwork, I believe, is one of those last things that's left to be solved in the system. The customers are just so used to getting your food on demand and your travel on demand, and why shouldn't paperwork be executed with the same level of speed and security?
And changing tack slightly, have you any other inspirations, I suppose, from in terms of being an entrepreneur than just Ally McBeal?
I would say Ally McBeal would have gotten me into a career in law per se, not necessarily. And I'm lucky, very lucky actually on that note, to have the ability to move into business in an area where I had, amassed a lot of network and domain knowledge. I think that's probably something that is becoming more and more prevalent in professional services. The things that you learn are so directly applicable to the world of business, and there's so much opportunity out there for people to use their professional qualifications in this kind of way. But more generally, an appetite for business. Yeah, I think maybe it was something to do with working on a lot of deals. I think law is definitely a place where life and business intersect in quite an exciting way. So I would have been very inspired by clients on the other side of the desk or the other side of the phone. And I guess from my own background, my family are entrepreneurial. I'm from a farming background, kind of diversified farming background. So yeah, I always just had a little something in me that was interested in getting involved in business.
And how have you found it then, I suppose, from a personality trait point of view? How have you found building your own business over the last period of time?
Huge learning curve, because I think professional services are there's more of a playbook there, and rightly so. And I think there isn't a founder out there that won't admit to the reality that, when you are starting out your own company and you're taking on responsibility you've decided that you're going to do something of value, and you want to follow through with it in a certain way, and you're taking that responsibility on board. Um, there's no set playbook for any one company or founder, um, and yet the goals and the objectives you're trying to achieve can be quite lofty at the beginning. So um, I'd say you build up a certain level of resilience for dealing with new things on a daily basis, um, and it's a big learning curve, at the very beginning. And I think they say about everything, your first year living in London is going to be more difficult to settle in, and I think your first year as a founder, you're taking on investment and you're proving out your product. um that's where the real challenges lie in terms of resilience and sticking through that first year, and getting over that. Then it's a massive win, and you meet people then like Chris, and you meet people like Martin and Amanda, and the guys you've even just mentioned, um and you learn a lot more and bring your business up along the levels. So yeah, it's been a great experience. And I think one learning on personal level is relationships are very important, and listening and talking to your customer. I was really impressed by Stripe really recently brought out more face to face and on phone customer engagement. And I think that's really, really important. I think in the era of chatbots and automation generally, people forget that at the nub of it, you are solving problems for people, or you're helping people, or you're responsible to people if they're your stakeholders. And putting more and more and more and more time into relationships is really important. And that's, I guess, a big difference, and a big thing that I find very, very important in business to date and in general.
Yeah, and just put yourself back into the mindset of where you were and what you were thinking when you decided to leave the last law firm that you were working for, Jennifer, before you made the leap. Just tell us what was going through your head at that minute, and how you actually then executed the launch of the business.
I guess there, I was coming to a place where I was pretty certain that there was an opportunity, in the kind of the system of paperwork to do something meaningful, and accelerate. I was listening to the frustrations of a lot of clients, um, on, speed of completing ostensibly quite simple tasks and things on the to-do list in, let's say, moving money or closing a deal. Um, and I was listening to that frustration more and more, and I think that just got me very excited about exploring areas in. And uh and the mindset generally was probably one of, I mean, I don't know, I was probably crazy at the time.
Yeah,
I spent
they say
an
you got to
awful
be a
lot of
bit.
time.
They say you got to be a bit delusional to be a startup founder, right?
um I no, I wouldn't advocate delusion in setting up a company,
No.
because you're going to face, it's extremely challenging. And I think planning ahead before you take the leap is extremely important. So I think the craziness came in where I cancelled. I just became completely obsessed with Othello when I started looking more and more into the space and how untapped the market was. So I would have spent Christmas 2015, 2016, definitely in the eyes of my family, a crazy person, researching quite a lot, living life like a hermit. And I put about 6 months research just in my own time into the space before I finally made the decision to hand in my notice and leave my legal career. But in the interim period, I did, kind of where time allowed, meet some people in the ecosystem in Dublin. I remember meeting a guy called Dermot Casey, who you might all be
Oh
aware of.
yeah, yeah. I
He's a
just talked to him last week. Yeah.
yeah, venture investment leader at NDRC. And I went up to meet him for a cup of coffee, and I had a big business plan already prepared for Oathello, and probably the byproduct of a number of weekends spent in my kitchen with lots of post-its and research and whatnot. And I went in, and I remember the excitement at the time. And I think your own company at the beginning is kind of like, it's kind of like dating. You're completely obsessed at the beginning, and as the years go on, you become more realistic and you start delegating, and the network, you the honeymoon period is over, and you just start getting on with the more operational uh, side of things. But I just remember at the time, when you talk about mindset, I was sat on the couch in NDRC. I hadn't handed in my notice. I had a big business. I had some idea of where there was an opportunity. And I remember Dermot just looking squarely in the face. He's like, "Right, Jen, you're going to have to give up your day job." And I remember thinking that was quite daunting, because, I think practicing law is one that a lot of lawyers will agree it can be a very rewarding career, very enjoyable. And it doesn't happen overnight, and it's a very honored profession. And I kind of, in the back of my mind, was always at the start of the beginning of what I thought would be a very promising career. So I felt like I was almost breaking up with that dream as well. So trying to grapple with the two for a while was really difficult and a little bit painful. But it's when you get it from the horse's mouth, or from a guy like Dermot, who's been there and who has a lot of integrity, and has a vested interest in giving startups and founders good advice, and you hear an ultimatum like that, you sort of just decide to just take it and go with it. And that's what I did. And I was lucky that Enterprise Ireland and NDRC, you know, came on board. I got a lot of help from family, from friends, from myself, and from a number of lawyers that I would have worked with over the years, and I would have trained up with from my early 20s. And with that help and support and everything, we got through the kind of product market fit stage, and that was it. So that feels like a very long time ago now. But yeah, to answer your question on mindset, probably a mixture of obsession and hard work and madness, and then just deciding to take advice from people that know more than you.
And at what point then did you feel like you'd actually, you had something that you felt that you were validated in all the decisions you'd made and the choice you'd made in terms of going ahead with Oathello?
I suppose coming from a domain, coming from an area that I had known it already, and it was pretty much all I really knew was like documents and law and dealing with clients. And I would have spent a lot of time, at that. And it's no secret that lawyers work quite hard. And you mentioned there, Owen, the type of hours that JP Morgan were cutting back on. There's people behind those hours, and you I don't know, is it that 10,000 hours thing someone had mentioned to me? Maybe that sometimes applies indirectly when you've got a lot of domain knowledge there. That I suppose the first validation was really just talking to partners and lawyers in the network, and business clients generally, that agreed that, yeah, something meaningful has to be done about the notarization space, or more, I would say now, in the genesis of Oathello today, the high ticket value document space. So I think I felt myself that there was enough validation in getting time with these people, focus groups, and sort of letters of intent to explore and move forward and go further. I think people do talk about your first paying client, and what is somebody willing to pay for. It is very, very important at the beginning to test, through the lens of validation, to test what people are willing to pay for. But I don't believe you should have your first dime from a customer before you decide that it's a sensible thing to follow through with a business plan. Because I think in enterprise sales, and or not even in enterprise, I guess we're a different kind of company, but um, for companies that start out trying to solve very big problems, sometimes it's actually more just about talking to customers in a sensible manner and learning more before you bring a product to market. And of course, there's time and money involved in bringing a product to market. So there's a balancing act there. But I think engaging with customers and talking to them, listening to them, and allowing that to refine your product market fit phase is a sensible thing to do. And it's probably enough validation for any business.
So tell me, what is 2019 going to bring then?
Very exciting stuff. I suppose, in learning and what we learned since we teamed up with Barclays and Techstars over here in London and engaging more with banks as businesses, and realizing that, regardless of all the bad press, the biggest and best banks in the system, and take challenger banks out of the system, the biggest and the best and the Barclays in the world, they are putting a lot of time and effort and thought into building excellent products for their customers. But these developers are being let down at the moment by, the tools that are available to authenticate the paperwork that are involved in those customer journeys. And so we're working and we're engaging closely with developers in this space so that they can build optimal products that don't fall offline just because you can't execute a deed or a facility letter at the end of the product. And so we're really excited about teaming up in a more meaningful way with banks and the developers and engineers at banks and the stakeholders in customer experience to help with that last bit. Because as we all know, products are fantastic, but if they have to fall offline because you need to print something off and get it, or connect with people via video or any of those other more janky types of solutions, then it lets the product down, and it lets the resources that a bank has deployed towards building meaningful products or optimizing customer experience fall, by the wayside. So I guess that's the most exciting departure for 2019 is the release of our APIs for developers to build the best products possible with a very sophisticated authentication tool for high ticket value documents.
Interesting. Just to switch tack just for a second, Jennifer. Obviously, being an entrepreneur can be all encompassing, not just only in the time that you spend working on your product and talking to customers and talking to investors, but also your personal life, right? So who do you lean on? And how does that help?
That's a really good question, timely question as well, Pete, because I suppose I was talking to the new Barclays Techstars cohort for 2019, and I was down there a couple of weeks ago at the Rise building to talk to the new cohort and give some advice. And when I was meditating beforehand on what would be useful for these guys to hear, the one thing that I've learned really acutely in the last year or two is your circle has to be quite tight and filled with people that you trust and that understand what all of this is about, because it's a very different type of a life to maybe the career that I would have left, and it's hard to pin down the reasons why, but it's different. And so the people around you have to really have an understanding of that and a trust, and they probably have to have enormous amounts of patience. They probably need, I think, I don't know, it came up in conversation recently. I think founders need a lot of humble pie. They need humble pie in the freezer and they need it in the stocks. But family members of founders need a lot of patience. And I guess to answer your question more specifically, my family have been a great support. I guess my dad is probably somebody that I would lean on for just a bit of general advice, even though he wouldn't have, much to do with the tech space. And a couple of very close friends that I would have grown up with, and thankfully, and what's really great about the community there at Rise, the network that the likes of Chris has built up around him is that you meet extremely supportive people that you get a pleasant surprise where you might be talking to them about doing business or starting, exploring some opportunity, but you realize there's some really, really good people with a lot of integrity that understand what you might be going through as a founder and are willing to lend an ear or give some advice or lend support. And I was particularly grateful for that, I guess, as somebody that sort of moved over last year into a new city as well. So, um,
Yeah, I know what you're saying. I mean, it does become very personal, right? And that when you step out of the corporate world or step out of a big professional services firm where you and your brand were kind of separate and distinct, and people saw Jennifer and people also saw the company you work for. But when you become a startup founder, it's one and the same, right? And that when you put it all together, you then look for people who can help on that basis and say, you find the good people, right? And it does make it incredibly helpful the more people like that you can have around you. So I get that. I get that.
I think it does. But I would say one thing. I think at the beginning, when you've made your decision that this is you're taking responsibility for following this through, and at the very foundation of the core of the company and all of the rest, yes, it is very true that the business and the product, or business and product and the founder are one and the same. But I think over time, it is very healthy to create a healthy disconnect between those two things, because otherwise, actually, the business doesn't really scale as it should. So there's actually people that can, yeah, and what I find in my experience is that it's those types of people that enable you to disconnect the two and work out where it is your new strengths lie. Because just as a company evolves over time and a product evolves over time, the role of the originating founder or founders as they may be needs to evolve as well over time and come up the levels. And it's actually probably those people that enable that, that help you work out what that disconnect looks like and how best to move forward with that, are some of the most valuable people that you can lean on as well. And I've been very, very lucky to meet some of those people. But yeah, it's a very, very tricky one. And I think it's something that will come up for more and more discussion, as the availability of capital now for good ideas and for good business plans, is healthy, and our world is changing so much more rapidly than it was even 10 or 20 years ago. So I think, this concept of managing what it means to be a founder of an early stage company will become more and more prevalent over the next few years, because it's really important to navigate that change successfully and cope with the challenges as they arise.
And
But
just
people and relationships are number
and
one.
just touching on something you mentioned there, how do you think has, in terms of your own skills and your own role, how has that changed from a founder now to a scaling company, I suppose, or to becoming a scaling company? What sort of skills do you think you've had to learn or have had to change in that period?
Yeah, I think I would have gone from a very like in-depth research analysis and engaging with customer feedback loop and focus groups at the beginning in a very detailed manner, um, moving more into researching market trends generally, which led to the kind of, I suppose, overall completion now of our suite of products. And now that we've got products, we're very happy are system changing and API led. I think my role would be more so now about actually getting out there, and talking about this and what that means for organizations. Because there's a number of different verticals, or divisions of organizations within the payments and finance space that need to be brought up to speed and made aware of what we're doing and what other vendors in this space are doing in different ways. Um, you know, take for example, you've got the environmental angle with paperwork, where goodness knows how many buildings you could fill with, paper in general within even, let's say, the square mile in London, or the amount of unnecessary paperwork that's generated, that there are sophisticated tools out there now where legally and securely these documents can be authenticated online. And we're not talking about blockchain here. We're not talking about anything complicated. We're actually talking about the existing infrastructure of the web that is ripe for the taking when it comes to tidying up these processes in a secure and legal manner. So I think it's about educating now the wider community on the one thing that we know the most about, because we don't profess to know everything, and we don't profess to know very much about anything else but the authentication of high ticket value documents. So it's about getting that message out there. And I think that can be done in a number of very interesting ways, whether it's environmental or humanitarian, or from a security or audit trail perspective, or of course the more obvious one, which is customer experience, acquisition, onboarding, and what a banking customer's journey should look like going into the future.
So listen, we touched on a lot of topics there, and obviously 2019 sounds like you've got a lot of great plans and stuff to deliver on this year. We're going to wrap up now, but I suppose what I always like to ask before we wrap up is, tell us something that people wouldn't expect to know about you.
I think this always gets a bit of a surprise, but I'm partial to some part-time farming. I grew up on a farm, and I don't think I'll ever lose my love of the countryside and dealing with animals. And I think it would have come as a surprise even throughout secondary school. Why is Jen late for school? Oh, they were moving cattle from one field to another. And I think being so involved in a family business, and I remember I was about, I guess, 16 or 17 years of age, and you're at that age where you're pretty conscious about, what the guy in your class that you fancy thinks about you or whatever. And I remember being caught red-handed on the roads of my hometown in a pair of wellies at about 7 a.m, with a bunch of other of my family, moving cattle from one field to another or something like that, and coming into school and just coming up for the biggest slagging going. So there's something that's very close to my heart, but I guess it's pretty uncanny because London and the surrounds here are seem like a million miles away, but it's I guess a pretty surprising fact to me. I don't own a pair of wellies over here, though, thankfully.
You always got to remember.
I don't think I've any use for them.
Yeah, you always got to remember where you came from, like my mom says, and my mom's gonna love this episode, Jennifer, because she was a lawyer as well, and I know all too well about notary publics and commissioner of oaths.
Is she based in the States?
Yes, she is.
And we're already actually talking to some partners over there, and we feel like we're on this really, really exciting journey. But thinking of home every once in a while can be just a nice thought. So you've made me homesick now for the rest of the day. Thanks, guys.
You're welcome. And listen, thank you very much for being on the show. It's great to hear how you're getting on.
Okay, amazing. Thanks, guys. Thanks for the time.
Thanks, Jennifer.
Money never sleeps, pal.
So that wraps things up for this episode, but don't go just yet. We'd like to thank Jennifer for opening up her mind for the 36th episode of Money Never Sleeps, podcast brought to you by Norio Ventures and Owen Fitzgerald and sponsored by Top Tier Recruitment. Remember, if you or a colleague need help attracting and retaining great talent for your fintech or financial services company, get in touch with the team at Top Tier Recruitment, as they really know their stuff. You can find them at www.toptierrecruitment.com. As for Jennifer, you can learn more about Oathello by checking them out on Oathello.com. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe to Money Never Sleeps on iTunes and leave us a review. Each one helps. Or you can subscribe via our podcast website to other media channels like Spotify and Stitcher. So just go to the subscribe page on moneyneversleeps.ie and follow the links. If you're searching directly on iTunes or Spotify, Money Never Sleeps is spelled as all one word. If there's someone you'd like to see featured on an upcoming episode of Money Never Sleeps, drop us a line on info@moneyneversleeps.ie or get in touch on Twitter @MNS Show. Check out the show notes on moneyneversleeps.ie for more detail as well. Finally, thanks to Conan Brophy from Create Sound for recording and editing this podcast. Till next time, thanks for listening. See ya!